I'm gonna switch it up a little bit. I'm gonna talk about wide receiver here. I'm gonna go with number 47 overall and number 20, wide receiver two, Nico Collins. I think he was. It's funny if you were watching the NFL playoffs last year and watching the Texans. Man, I know we were all probably excited. Like Nico was looking like a beast, right? Like he was coming down with big plays, especially with Dell on injury. Is really the main go-to receiver for the Texans. But as we know, in the offseason, they did sign Diggs. They have Nico. They got Tank. They'll have a healthy Tank Dell returning, Dalton Schultz, and Joe Mixon, right? So I think in the offseason, if you don't do any research, you don't really think about it. I think the common theme is just like I want to stay away from the Texans wide receiver core because I really don't know what's going to happen from week to week. But the more I dive into it, where if he's wide receiver 20, for one, he's ranked higher than Tank Dell. I really wanted to compare those two because they're the two main young wide receivers in that group. With as we know, Diggs is getting up there in age as well. So my take here is I really think Tank Dell is the guy to get right, and for the reason where just kind of looking back at Tank Dell's his game in general, he really thrives at the slot position. Okay, so like weeks 2, 3, 9, 10, 11, there were a lot of his big weeks. He was demanding 10 targets, 7 targets, 11 targets, 14 targets, 10 targets, right? Um, in those weeks. And 42% of the time he's playing at the slot position, right? So I think when I look at with all these with the offseason changes, I really don't think Tank Dell role on his team changes really. To me, Nico Collins' role is really getting, that's the most competition, right? Because he lines up on the outside the most, right? And so will Diggs, right? So I do know that Diggs is getting older in age too, but I think he probably still has at least 2 seasons left, and I really think there's going to be weeks that they really cancel each other out. But it's really Dell that Stroud does look towards in many games, as I said, just really running from the slot. And a very interesting thing to look at too is Dell's A dot is over 14.4. So what that tells me is that he's a very dynamic slot player. He's not just getting short, choppy routes. He's coming down with long plays. He can really make a lot of plays happen, getting touchdowns. He's not just like this, short route, slant type of wide receiver where they're really moving him around, especially in week 10 where Nico was out and Tank Dell only ran 12% from the slot, obviously with Nico out last year on his injury. So I'm actually pretty high on Tank Dell. So I say take advantage of Nico Collins being ranked higher. And I think some of that is because people think of the unknown with Tank Dell because they're like, oh, that's just, there's a few weeks that he played well and then he got hurt. But I think take advantage of that because I think it shows when they were both out on the field. Um, Stroud's favorite guy to go to was Tank Dell, and
Ethan, talk to me about Nico Collins and the state of the Texans wide receiver room. Tell us who's going to be the guy, please.
I actually think Collins may be a potential buy depending on kind of how you look at the situation, how you feel about these players. Obviously, Aaron, you like Tank Dell, so if you can move on from Collins because you think, hey, Tank Dell, a healthy Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs in the mix is going to obviously limit Collins. I understand that argument, but right now, the flip side, people might be thinking the same thing. Like, hey, Diggs is in town. Nico Collins' stock is way down. Maybe you can get him on the cheap. And just looking at what Collins did last year, I mean, he had 109 targets, which was ranked number 24th. So, I mean, nothing insane. And he was a top 10 wide receiver. CJ Stroud clearly liked Nico Collins. His QB rating per target was number 2 in the league at 129.6. So when CJ Stroud targeted Collins, most of the time they were hooking up. But I just think Collins was just he was a great receiver last year. I mean, he was very efficient. He was number 2 in yards per route run last year. He was number 3 in yards per target, number 9 in yards per reception. He was just a very efficient receiver and got it done. And like I said, he had 109 targets last year. I don't think his target volume is going to go down considerably with Stephon Diggs. I'm not a big Stephon Diggs fan. I think Diggs is more so he's definitely at the end of his career, and I think he's slipping more than people want to admit. The Buffalo Bills are have a Super Bowl window and they let him walk, right? They moved on from him. They traded him to the Houston Texans, and they were done with Stephon Diggs and his antics. So I think Nico Collins can still be that alpha X receiver that he was this past year, and I think you could see a potential buying opportunity if people think like you, Aaron, in terms of, hey, Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs may be the 1 and 2, and Nico is going to be an afterthought as the 3.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic in the Texans wide receiver room. Definitely one of the more polarizing topics so far in the offseason, because when you have 3 capable players plus a capable tight end and Dalton Schultz in there with a good quarterback and CJ Stroud, who's only going to get better presumably. It's people are kind of dug in on their guy in this room, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. But I think fading the age of a guy like Diggs isn't necessarily the wrong approach here for a guy who turns 31 during the upcoming season.